The emergency room door slammed open and a young nurse was dragged out in front of everyone, accused of killing a patient, stripped of her badge, and told never to come back. The attending physician's voice echoed off the tile walls. Security had her by both arms. Staff stood frozen in the hallway, some looking away, some watching with their phones half raised. Nobody said a word in her defense. Nobody stepped forward. And then, before the doors even closed behind her, 3 men in military tactical gear walked through the main entrance, scanned the room, and asked for her by a name nobody in that hospital had ever heard. If this story already has you hooked, stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will blow your mind. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Maya Collins had been working the trauma floor at Harbor Ridge Medical Center for 2 years, and in that time she had learned to navigate the rhythms of the place the way you learn a city. Not from a map, but from walking it every day until the shortcuts become instinct. She knew which supply closet always ran low on 4x4 gauze by Thursday. She knew that the elevator closest to the ICU stuck on the 3rd floor if you pressed the button too fast. She knew that Dr. Victor Hale liked his chart summaries brief and his authority unchallenged, and that nurses who questioned him in front of residents did not last long on his rotation. She was not the kind of person who drew attention to herself. She was 29, average height, had a habit of keeping her dark hair pulled back tight when she was working, and wore the same scuffed running shoes she'd had for 3 years because they were comfortable and she was on her feet for 12 hours at a stretch. She didn't go to staff happy hours. She didn't linger in the break room. When her shift ended, she went home, ate whatever she could put together in under 20 minutes, and slept. The other nurses liked her well enough, in the distracted surface-level way that people in high-turnover, high-stress environments tend to like coworkers who don't cause problems. She was reliable. She showed up. She didn't complain about bad assignments or fight over the better shifts. The charge nurse, a compact, sharp-eyed woman named Denise Parrish, had told her once, "You're good at this, Collins. You've got instincts." Maya had thanked her and gone back to charting. What nobody knew, what Maya had not volunteered and nobody had thought to ask, was that she had spent 4 years before nursing school doing something entirely different in places that didn't appear on the resumes she submitted. The shift that changed everything started at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, which in Portland meant cold and dark and a parking lot full of standing water. Maya clocked in, pulled her assignment from Denise, and headed into the trauma bay to take over from the night team. The handoff was fast, the way it always was when nights had been rough. A night nurse named Terry gave her the rundown without making eye contact, 3 admits still being worked up, 1 elderly man with a femur fracture waiting on ortho, and a 44-year-old named Gerald Bauer who had come in around 2 a.m. with chest pain and was now in room 7, stabilized but not fully sorted. "Cardiology's been paged," Terry said, already pulling off his gloves. "Hale did the initial eval, wants serial troponins and a repeat EKG at 7. What was the first troponin? 0.6, borderline. EKG findings? Nonspecific ST changes. Hale said probably anxiety. Maya looked at the chart Terry handed her. She flipped to the EKG strip clipped to the back, a habit she couldn't shake, always going to the paper before the summary. She stood there for a moment longer than Terry expected. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "Go home." She walked to room 7. Gerald Bauer was a heavy-set man with a gray beard and the kind of face that had spent a lot of time outdoors. He was sitting up in the bed with his arms folded across his chest, which she noted. People with true cardiac pain didn't usually sit up that way. They curled or they went flat. But the strip was bothering her. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Maya. I'm taking over your care. How are you feeling right now?" "Better than 2 in the morning," he said. "Still feels like something's sitting on my chest, but not as heavy." "Any pain in your jaw? Left arm?" "Jaw, a little. Had that since I came in. They said it was tension." She checked his pressure, slightly elevated, not alarming. His heart rate was regular. She looked at the EKG strip again, specifically at the lead patterns that had been labeled non-specific. The ST elevation in V2 and V3 was subtle. Easy to miss at 2 a.m. on a busy night. But it was there. She stepped into the hallway and paged cardiology directly, bypassing the standing order to wait for Hale's sign-off on escalation. 40 minutes later, Gerald Bauer was in the cath lab with a 90% LAD occlusion, a widowmaker, the kind of blockage that killed people quietly before anyone realized what they were looking at. The interventional cardiologist, a compact Indian-American man named Dr. Ajay Kapoor, found Maya afterward in the hallway outside the unit. "Good catch," he said. "Another hour and this man might not have made it." "The EKG was there," she said. "Hale read that strip." "I know." Kapoor looked at her for a moment, then nodded and walked away. She should have known that was the beginning of the problem and not the end of it. Dr. Victor Hale was the kind of man who filled a room before he entered it. The sound of his footsteps, the way residents straightened when they heard him coming, the particular quality of silence that preceded his opinions. He was 53, trim, silver-haired, and had the confidence of someone who had been told he was exceptional often enough that he had stopped questioning it. He was not incompetent. That was the complicated part. He was skilled enough that his blind spots were easy to excuse, and politically connected enough that the people who might have pushed back on those blind spots had learned not to. He found Maya at the nursing station at 10 a.m. He didn't raise his voice. That was not his style. "Collins," he said, setting a folder on the counter in front of her. "Walk me through your decision to escalate Bauer." She turned from the monitor. His EKG showed subtle STEMI pattern in V2 and V3. I was concerned about LAD involvement. I read that strip at 2 in the morning and documented nonspecific changes. "I know. I thought the pattern warranted a second look." "You bypassed the escalation protocol." "I paged cardiology directly. Yes. That is not your call to make." She kept her voice level. "The patient had a 90% blockage. If I'd waited—" "You are a nurse," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You administer. You document. You follow the protocols established by this department. You do not override attending physician assessments because you have a feeling." A resident standing 5 feet away was suddenly extremely interested in his clipboard. "I understand," Maya said. "Good." He picked up the folder. "I'm documenting this as a protocol violation. You'll meet with Denise and HR this afternoon." He walked away. She turned back to the monitor. The meeting happened at 2 p.m. in a small conference room that smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. Denise sat across from Maya with the expression of a person who was doing a thing they didn't want to do. An HR coordinator named Sandra Oaks sat beside Denise and spoke in the careful, cushioned language of institutional risk management. "We're not disputing the patient outcome," Sandra said, "but protocol exists for a reason, and when nurses circumvent physician authority, it creates liability exposure for the hospital." "The patient was having a heart attack," Maya said, "which is exactly the kind of high-stakes situation where protocols are most critical. The protocol would have had me wait another 40 minutes for Hale to be reached for sign-off on escalation." "That's a system conversation, Maya, not an individual judgment call," Denise said. "I know this feels unfair." She said it like she meant it. "I'm not here about fair," Maya said. "I'm here because a man is alive and someone wants to write me up for it." Sandra shuffled her papers. "Dr. Hale has also raised some broader concerns about your conduct on the floor. He's indicated this isn't the first instance of you operating outside your defined role." "What other instances?" "That's part of what we'll be reviewing." Maya looked at Denise, who looked at the table. "Am I being suspended?" Maya asked. "Not at this time," Sandra said. "You're being reassigned to medical surgical pending the review, effective tomorrow." Med-surg was the long hallway on the second floor where patients came after the acute phase was over, where the work was slower and quieter, and where nurses who had been sidelined ended up waiting to see what happened next. Maya knew the assignment for what it was. She took it without argument, went home, and stood in her kitchen for a long time looking at nothing in particular. She made eggs. She ate them standing at the counter. She didn't sleep well. The next 4 days were uneventful in the way that slow punishments are uneventful. She did her work. She was efficient and thorough with her med-surg patients. She smiled at the right times and kept her opinions to herself and let the rhythms of the quieter floor carry her through the hours. On the 5th day, a nurse from the trauma unit named Priya Menon found her in the break room during a shared 15-minute window. "You hear about Bauer?" Priya said, pouring coffee. "No. He sent a card to the unit, said he wanted to thank the nurse who caught something the doctors missed." Priya looked at her over the rim of the mug. Hale had it pulled from the board before the end of the day. Maya was quiet for a moment. "How is he?" "Home. Good. Apparently. His wife called too." Priya hesitated. "I'm sorry about the reassignment. For what it's worth, most of us know what actually happened." "You don't need to do that." "I know, I'm doing it anyway." She finished her coffee and put the mug in the sink. "Hale's done this before. The last nurse who questioned him ended up in Central Supply for 3 months before she quit." Maya didn't say anything. "I just thought you should know," Priya said, and left. The incident that ended everything happened on a Friday afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the ER was running at capacity and everyone on the floor was moving at the particular controlled speed that meant nobody had enough hands. It started with a code called in Room 4, a 60-year-old woman named Patricia Holst, who had come in with what looked like a hypertensive crisis and had been placed on a nitroprusside drip that someone had set at the wrong rate. Maya heard the code from the med-surg hallway, and something in her, something old and automatic, was already moving toward the stairs before she consciously decided to go. She pushed through the stairwell door and took the stairs to the trauma floor 2 at a time. The trauma bay was already loud. Hale was inside, running the code, his voice carrying into the hallway with the particular sharpness of a man who wanted everyone to know he was in charge. A second-year resident was doing compressions. An ER nurse named Dave was pushing meds. The monitor showed a flat, ugly rhythm. Maya stood in the doorway and looked at the drip hanging from the IV pole. She looked at the rate. She looked at the empty syringe on the tray beside it. "The nitroprusside is double the ordered rate," she said. Nobody turned. "The infusion rate is wrong," she said, louder. Dave looked at her. "Collins, you're not supposed to be—" "The rate is wrong," she said. She stepped into the room. "She's vasodilating faster than she can compensate. She needs the drip stopped and saline bolus now." "Collins." Hale's voice cut through the room like something physical. "Get out. Look at the drip. Look at the rate on the pump." "Security," he said. Just that word. Just that flat. A security guard appeared at her elbow within 30 seconds. They must have been nearby, or someone called the moment she appeared. She didn't fight. She let the guard's hand close on her arm and she let herself be walked backward out of the doorway, and the last thing she saw was Dave looking at the pump, looking at the rate, looking at her. What? They took her all the way to the main entrance. A second guard joined the first. Hale appeared in the hallway behind them, surgical cap still on, and spoke to the guards without addressing Maya directly. "She is not to return to any clinical area," he said. "I want her badge collected and a security note in the system." "Sir," one of the guards said, and held out his hand. Maya unclipped her badge and set it in his palm. "You need to look at the pump rate in room 4, she said. To Hale, directly. His eyes moved to her with the particular coldness of a man who has already won and knows it. "You caused a panic in an active resuscitation," he said. "You interfered with patient care while on a disciplinary reassignment. You will be hearing from HR and from the nursing board." "Is Patricia Holst alive?" The doors opened behind her. Cold air came in from outside. "Remove her," Hale said, and turned back toward the trauma floor. The guards were not rough about it. They didn't need to be. They walked her through the main entrance and out onto the concrete apron in front of the hospital. And one of them said, "I'm sorry, ma'am," in a way that suggested he meant it. And then they went back inside and the doors slid closed. She stood there in the cold. Cars moved through the parking structure across the street. A man in scrubs was on his phone near the ambulance bay, not looking at her. She had her jacket and her keys. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She had nothing else. She stood there for a moment, and then she sat down on the low concrete barrier beside the entrance and breathed the cold air in slowly, out slowly, The way she had once learned to breathe in situations where falling apart was not an option. She had been sitting there for maybe 4 minutes when the black SUV pulled into the ambulance bay. She noticed it the way she noticed most things, not as a specific object of attention, but as a data point, a change in the environment. Black SUVs in hospital ambulance bays generally meant either federal activity or private security for a high-profile patient. She didn't look at it directly. The doors opened. 3 men got out. They were dressed in civilian clothes, dark jackets, no insignia, but they moved the way she recognized, a specific kind of controlled efficiency. Weight forward, eyes already scanning. Not hospital security, not federal agents in the FBI sense. The man in front was tall and in his mid-40s, with a face that had been outdoors and in difficult situations for a long time. He scanned the entrance, scanned the parking area, and then his eyes landed on her sitting on the concrete barrier. He said something to the 2 men behind him. They stopped where they were. He walked directly to her. She watched him come, and somewhere in the part of her brain that cataloged things without asking her permission, something clicked. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. "We're looking for someone," he said. "Navy combat medic. Goes by Falcon." He paused. "Last confirmed location, northern Kandahar, 4 years ago." Maya looked at him. The cold air moved between them. "We have a patient inside," the man said. "Military, special operations. The team here doesn't know what they're looking at." His voice was calm, but there was a pressure underneath it. "I was told if I ever needed someone who could handle this, to find Falcon." She stood up from the concrete barrier. "What's the injury?" she said. "Penetrating abdominal trauma," the man said. "Fragment wound, we think. He's been compensating for about 6 hours. BP's dropping." She was already moving toward the entrance before he finished the sentence. "Name?" she said. "Commander Reyes, Marcus Reyes, SEAL Team 8. "I meant yours." "Garrett, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Garrett." The automatic doors slid open, and she walked through them without breaking stride. Garrett fell in beside her, the 2 men behind him adjusting immediately to follow. The security guard at the desk looked up, started to rise, and Garrett held out a credentials card without looking at him. The guard sat back down. "Who's treating him?" Maya asked. "Attending named Whitfield, trauma fellow, 2nd year. He's in over his head and he knows it." "What imaging do you have?" "CT from 40 minutes ago. My medic has the files on a tablet." "Get him to send them to the trauma bay screen now. Bay 2 if it's open." She was walking faster. Garrett matched her. "Did Reyes have any intervention in the field?" "Packed wound, tourniquet on the thigh secondary, and 1 liter of saline. That's it." "How long ago was the packing?" 8 hours. She stopped walking, turned to look at Garrett directly for the first time since they'd left the entrance. 8 hours with abdominal packing. "We were 2 hours out of the city when things went sideways. We drove the rest." She turned back and kept moving. "He's going to need surgery. I can stabilize him, maybe by time, but the fragment has to come out, and if it's nicked anything in there—" "I know what it means," Garrett said. His voice was flat in a way that meant he'd been sitting with that knowledge for a while and had run out of ways to feel about it. They pushed through the double doors into the trauma corridor. The scene in Bay 2 was the kind of controlled unraveling that happened when medical staff were competent enough to know they were losing and not experienced enough to know what to do about it. A young physician, Whitfield, Maya guessed, early 30s, sandy hair damp at the temples, was standing at the bedside with a look on his face like a man trying to solve a math problem while the building was on fire. 2 nurses bracketed the bed. The monitor above showed a heart rate of 118 and a blood pressure that had no business being where it was, 84/52 and trending. The patient was a big man, broad-shouldered, stripped to the waist with a pressure dressing across the left lower quadrant that had bled through twice based on the layering. His face was pale and tight, the specific pallor of someone whose body was working very hard to maintain something it was running out of resources to maintain. His eyes were open and tracking. Maya walked to the bedside. Whitfield looked up, looked past her, to Garrett, looked back at her. "Who are you?" "Maya Collins. I'm a nurse on this floor." "You're—" He glanced at the door, clearly aware she hadn't come through normal channels. You need to have credentials to be... What's his last output? Excuse me? Urine output. Last measure. When was it? What volume? A pause. One of the nurses, a woman, late 40s, steady hands, said 30 cubic centimeters in the last 2 hours. So he's not making urine, Maya said. That dressing? When was the last time you assessed underneath it? Whitfield straightened. I'm the treating physician here? Then treat him. She said it without heat, which was worse than anger. His pressure's in the tank, he's oliguric, and you've got a combat fragment wound that's been packed for 8 hours. If there's a slow bleed into the peritoneal cavity, you've got maybe 20 minutes before his pressure craters, and the window for surgical intervention closes. So either tell me you have a plan, or let me help you make one. The room was very quiet. Garrett said nothing. He stood near the door with his arms at his sides and his face carefully neutral, which was a kind of permission. Whitfield looked at the monitor, looked at the patient. Something went through his expression. Not surrender exactly, but the particular moment when a person decides that ego is less important than outcome. I've got surgery paged, he said. They're 15 minutes out. He doesn't have 15 minutes at this pressure. She moved to the supply cart. I need a second large bore IV if he only has one. I need uncross-matched O negative blood if you have it. And I need someone to call your attending and tell them to move. The steady-handed nurse was already reaching for the IV kit. Whitfield said, We have 2 units of O negative in the emergency cooler. Get them, Arsham. What happened over the next 11 minutes was not smooth. It was not the kind of practiced clinical ballet that gets depicted in television dramas. Everyone moving in synchronized purpose with perfect timing. It was loud in patches and silent in others. And there were 2 moments where things went sideways briefly. A line that blew on the first attempt, a blood pressure cuff that gave an erratic reading that sent someone for a manual. And through all of it, Maya moved with a quality of focus that had nothing to do with the training she'd gotten in nursing school. She had her hands on the dressing and was assessing the wound while Whitfield handled the lines, and she talked as she worked, not explaining herself exactly, but narrating enough that the room could follow. Wound track is lateral, left lower quadrant. My concern is the descending colon or iliac vessels depending on angle. He needs exploratory lap and he needs it now, not when surgery decides to show up at their own pace. The patient, Reyes, was watching her. He hadn't said anything since she'd walked in. His face was doing the thing faces did when the body was pulling resources inward, that particular narrowed focus that wasn't unconsciousness but was moving in that direction. She looked at him directly. You still with me? Yeah. His voice was rough. You're Falcon. She didn't react to that, not visibly. I need you to stay awake. Can you do that? I've been awake through worse. I know you have. Keep talking to me. She adjusted the dressing pressure, watching his face for the spike of pain that would tell her what she needed to know about the wound depth. He gave it. A quick tightening around the eyes, a breath held and released. But he didn't make a sound. How long ago did this pain shift from sharp to dull? He had to think about it. Hour, maybe 90 minutes. That was not good. Dull pain following sharp and abdominal trauma usually meant something had stopped fighting and started pooling. She straightened and looked at the monitor. Pressure was 88/54. The blood was running, but it was running into a system that had been compensating for too long. Where is surgery? She said. I'm here. The voice came from the doorway. A woman in her 50s, compact, silver-streaked hair pulled back, still tying her surgical mask. She took in the room in about 2 seconds. Patient, monitors, the team arrangement, Maya at the bedside, and moved forward. I'm Dr. Okoye. What do I have? Whitfield started to brief her. Maya stepped back 1 step to give him the floor, which was the right move and also cost her something to do. She stood near the monitor and watched Okoye's face as she listened, watched her go to the patient, watched her hands move with the quick confidence of a surgeon who had seen this pattern before and knew which parts of the picture mattered. Okoye looked up, made eye contact with Maya. You assessed the wound? Yes. Your read? Left lower quadrant penetrating probable colon involvement, possibly iliac vessel. Slow bleed based on the pressure curve and the timeline. He needs to be open. Okoye looked at her for one more second. Then she looked at Whitfield. Let's move. Or 3 is prepped. It will be in 4 minutes. Make it 2. She was already pulling her phone. And someone tell me who this nurse is because I want her in that room. The thing about operating rooms was that they had very specific rules about who could be in them and why. And those rules existed for good reasons, and Maya knew all of them. She also knew that Okoye's invitation was not a formal credentialing. It was a trauma surgeon making a judgment call about who had useful information and who should be present when things were uncertain. She scrubbed in. Nobody stopped her. What followed was 2.5 hours that she was not going to think about later as a sequence of events, but as a texture, the smell of the room, the particular quality of focused silence that fell when Okoye found the source of the bleed, the moment where things tipped from bad to manageable, and then the long, steady work of getting Reyes to the other side of the crisis. She was not primary. She was not scrubbed in as a surgical participant in any formal sense. She stood near the anesthesiologist, an older man named Dr. Park, who had the serene unflappability of someone who had watched very bad things go very well for long enough to trust the process. She tracked the monitors. She answered questions when Okoye asked them, about the wound, about what she'd observed, about what Reyes's condition had been when she'd entered the room. At one point, Okoye said, without looking up from the field, "You've seen fragment wounds before." It wasn't a question. "Some," Maya said. "Where?" A pause. "Overseas." Okoye glanced up briefly, said nothing more. Reyes came out of surgery at 9:17 p.m. He went to the ICU with a pressure that was ugly but real, 102/66 and climbing, and the particular fragile stability of a body that had just been through something serious and was deciding whether to accept the help it had been given. Maya stood in the scrub sink area outside the OR for a moment after everyone else had moved. She ran cold water over her wrists the way she used to do overseas when a thing was over and she needed to feel the temperature change against her skin. It was a stupid habit. She'd had it for years. Garrett was waiting in the hallway when she came out. "He's stable," she said. "I know. Okoye told me." He paused. "Thank you." "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't make it a thing. I did what needed to be done." He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect. More like recognition. The way you recognized a language you used to speak. "I know. That's what I meant." She started toward the hallway. "Collins." He fell in beside her. "I need to talk to you about something." "I figured." "Not here." She stopped walking, looked at him. "I just got escorted out of this hospital 4 hours ago. I don't technically have credentials to be in this building right now. Whatever you need to talk about, you might want to be efficient." "That's actually part of what I need to talk about," he said. "Sit down with me for 5 minutes." So, they found a family consultation room that wasn't occupied, a small square space with chairs and a box of tissues on a side table, the kind of room that had absorbed a lot of grief over the years and had it baked into the walls. Garrett closed the door. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and set it on the table. Maya didn't touch it. "You know what this is?" he said. She looked at it. "Looks like a JAG inquiry form." "It's more than that." He sat down across from her. "We've been building a case for 6 months against a procurement contractor who's been feeding compromised medical equipment into forward operating bases. Expired medications, defective trauma kits, blood products that didn't meet storage standards." He stopped. "Marines died. 2 of them in situations where if the equipment had been what it was supposed to be, they might not have." She said nothing. "The contractor has connections, political ones. The case keeps getting delayed, reassigned, quietly buried. We needed someone with a specific background, combat medicine, field experience, chain of custody for medical evidence, who wasn't already inside a system that the contractor could influence." He looked at her. "Your name came up." "My name is Maya Collins," she said. "I'm a nurse." Your Staff Sergeant Maya Collins, formerly attached to Naval Special Warfare Command as a combat medical specialist. You completed 4 deployments. You were decorated twice. You left service under a general discharge that someone in my chain wants to talk to you about because the circumstances don't add up. The room was very quiet. That's not a conversation I'm having tonight, she said. I know. I'm not asking for it tonight. He pushed the document slightly toward her. I'm asking you to look at that. She looked at it. She didn't pick it up. We can protect you while the investigation runs, he said. And whatever happened here today, the badge, the dismissal, we have standing to address that too, if you help us. I'm not interested in a trade, she said. It's not a trade. You helped one of my men tonight. I'm not the kind of person who forgets that. He stood up. Read the document. I'll be here until tomorrow morning. He left. She sat in the consultation room alone for a while. She picked up the document. She was still reading it when her phone buzzed. Priya's name on the screen. She answered. You need to know something, Priya said, her voice lower than usual. Hale is telling everyone you forced your way into room 4 during the code and created a disturbance that almost cost the patient her life. Patricia Holst, Maya said. She survived. She's in the ICU. The pump rate was wrong. Dave confirmed it, and 2 other nurses saw the readout. But Hale's version is the one going into the incident report. Maya closed her eyes briefly. He's talking to administration tonight, Priya said. He wants your nursing license flagged. He already called the state board. When did he call? This afternoon, before the military guys showed up. Maya looked at the JAG document on the table in front of her. She thought about Reyes in the ICU 2 floors up with a pressure that was climbing and a body that was deciding to live. She thought about Patricia Holst in another ICU bed, alive because someone looked at a pump rate. Priya, she said. Yeah. I need you to do something for me. The pump settings from room 4. They get logged in the system automatically when they're changed. The timestamp will show what the rate was when I walked in. I know. Can you pull that log? A pause. Maya, if I pull that, I'm not asking you to do anything with it. I'm asking you to look at it. Just look at it and tell me what it says. A longer pause. She could hear Priya breathing. It says, Priya said slowly, that the pump was running at twice the ordered rate from 1432 to 1447 when it was manually corrected by nursing staff. And when did I enter room 4? The door sensor log shows you entered at 1439. 8 minutes before the correction. 8 minutes. Okay, Maya said. Okay? That's all you've got? For now. She folded the JAG document and put it in her jacket pocket. Get some sleep, Priya. Are you serious right now? She hung up. She sat in the empty consultation room. Outside in the hallway, she could hear the low-frequency sounds of a hospital at night, the soft roll of a cart, a distant monitor alarm that someone silenced quickly, a voice giving a handoff report. The building breathed around her in its particular way. She thought about the document in her pocket. She thought about Garrett waiting somewhere in this building until morning. She thought about Hale, somewhere upstairs or down the hall, or already gone home, writing the version of today that he needed to be true. The thing that bothered her was not that he was lying. She had expected that. The thing that bothered her was that he was good at it, practiced, precise, with enough institutional authority to make the lie load-bearing. She had seen that before. In a different context, in a different country, with different stakes and the same fundamental architecture. Someone powerful writing a story about someone smaller and expecting the story to hold because power was the thing that made stories hold. She had not done anything about it then. She had left. She had traded one set of walls for another and told herself it was a choice. She sat with that for a moment. Then she stood up, put the chair back where it had been, turned off the consultation room light, and walked out into the hallway. She found Garrett at the ICU waiting area on the 3rd floor, sitting in a plastic chair with a coffee cup that had gone cold and his eyes on the floor. One of his men was asleep 2 chairs down. The other was on his phone. Garrett looked up when he heard her. She sat down across from him. Tell me about the contractor, she said. He straightened slightly, set down the coffee. Tell me everything, she said. Start from the beginning. Garrett looked at her for a moment, then leaned forward and began to speak. And what came out of his mouth in the next 20 minutes was the kind of story that didn't end with a conversation in a hospital waiting room. It was the kind of story that had been building for years under the surface of things, feeding on institutional silence and the particular willingness of systems to protect themselves before they protected the people inside them. He talked. She listened. And somewhere in the middle of what he was telling her, something shifted in her chest. Not anger exactly, and not the specific complicated grief she'd been carrying since she'd walked out of Harbor Ridge's front entrance in the cold. Something closer to recognition. The feeling of identifying a target after a long time of not being able to see clearly. She had walked away once before. She had told herself it was survival. She wasn't sure she believed that anymore. When Garrett finished, the hospital was quieter around them. The ICU doors down the hall showed no movement. Somewhere a phone rang twice and went to voicemail. "I need to know one thing," she said. "Ask." "The people who buried the investigation the first time, are any of them connected to what's happening in this hospital?" Garrett was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. The kind of pause that was not uncertainty, but calculation. "Why would you ask that?" he said. She watched his face. "Because Victor Hale's brother-in-law is a federal procurement officer," she said. "I looked him up 6 months ago when Hale started the campaign against me. I didn't know what to do with it then." The fluorescent light above them hummed. Garrett's expression had gone very still. "How do you know that?" he said. "Because I was very bored on a lot of night shifts, and I have a habit of pulling threads." She held his gaze. "Is that connected or not?" He didn't answer immediately. He picked up the cold coffee, looked at it, put it back down. "That," he said carefully, "is something we need to talk about with my JAG officer present." The doors at the end of the hallway opened. A man she didn't recognize walked through them. Not in uniform, but moving with the same quality Garrett and his team moved with. That particular economy of motion. He was carrying a laptop bag and a hard-sided case, and behind him, 2 more people she didn't recognize followed, one of them in a suit that had the specific fit of government issue. Garrett stood up. Maya stood up. The man with the laptop reached them and looked at Maya directly. He had an ID clipped to his lapel, and in the fluorescent light she could read the agency seal before she could read his name. "Ms. Collins," he said, "I'm Special Agent Torres. I've been on a plane for 4 hours, and I think you and I have been looking for each other for a long time." He opened the hard-sided case. Inside, on top of a stack of manila folders, was a photograph. She recognized the location in the background before she recognized anything else. A forward operating base she hadn't thought about in 3 years. And in the foreground, 2 people. One of them a man she didn't know, and the other one her, in uniform, standing next to a supply crate stenciled with a contractor's logo. The same contractor Garrett had just spent 20 minutes telling her about. She looked at Torres. "You've had this for how long?" she said. 14 months, he said. The air between them was very still. "And you waited," she said. "We were building a case. People died while you were building your case." He didn't look away. "Yes," he said. "They did." The hallway was completely quiet. Garrett was watching her. Torres was watching her. The 2 people behind Torres were watching her. She looked at the photograph again. She looked at the logo on the crate. Something she had tried not to think about for 3 years. Something she had packed down and left in a country she had not returned to. Was now sitting in a hard-sided case in a hospital hallway in Portland, waiting for her to decide what to do with it. She picked up the photograph. She held it the way you held something you'd been pretending didn't exist, carefully, like it might break or bite, like the weight of it was different from what paper should weigh. She looked at the contractor's logo on the crate. She looked at her own younger face, the particular set of her jaw that she recognized as the expression she wore when something was wrong, and she hadn't figured out yet what to do about it. "Medcore Supply Solutions," she said. "You know the name," Torres said. "I know the crate. We got a shipment at the FOB in late 2019. Half the trauma kits were short on hemostatic gauze. The suture kits had wrong-size needles, and one of the IV fluid bags was already compromised when we opened the seal." She set the photograph back in the case. "I filed a complaint through the supply chain officer. I was told it was a documentation error on our end. It wasn't. I know it wasn't. I knew it wasn't then." She looked at him. "What happened to the complaint?" Torres glanced at Garrett, a small glance, the kind that contained information. It was routed to the Contracting Oversight Office, Torres said, where it was reviewed by a deputy director named William Sauer. She didn't say anything for a moment. Hale's brother-in-law, Garrett said quietly. Sauer buried it, Torres said, and 4 others like it from different units over the same fiscal year. Then he approved Medcor's contract renewal for another 3 years. He reached into the hard-sided case and produced a folder, which he held out to her. There are 22 documented deaths that our team believes are directly attributable to compromised equipment from Medcor during that period. She took the folder. She opened it. She didn't let herself rush through it, even though every instinct pushed her to. She read it the way she'd learned to read casualty reports, systematically, because speed made you miss things, and things you missed in these documents had names and faces attached to them. The names were there, 22 of them, dates, locations, circumstances. Some of them she recognized, not personally, but the way you recognize the shape of situations you'd been close to. One of the names she did recognize personally. She stopped on that page. Corporal Dennis Waverly, Forward Operating Base Kestrel, November 14, 2019. She closed the folder. I was there, she said. We know, Torres said. I tried to save him. She said it flatly, not asking for acknowledgement. The hemostatic gauze didn't perform. I used everything I had, and it wasn't enough. She looked at the folder in her hands. They told me afterward it was the severity of the wound, that nothing could have. The gauze was 18 months past its rated efficacy date, Torres said. Medcor had relabeled the packaging. The hallway was very quiet. Garrett's hand moved like he was going to say something and then didn't. She set the folder back in the case. She had carried Waverly's death for 4 years as a personal failure. She had rebuilt her life around the possibility that she simply hadn't been good enough, fast enough, skilled enough. It was not a comfortable thing to carry, but it was a comprehensible one. It had edges she could map. What Torres had just handed her was something different, an error with a human author, a choice someone made in an office building that ended a 23-year-old's life in the dirt of a forward operating base while she pressed gauze against a wound that wasn't going to close. She breathed. What do you need from me? She said. What they needed was specific, and it was not simple. Torres laid it out in the family consultation room they moved to, spreading documents across the low table while his colleague, a woman named Agent Vasquez, dark-suited, efficient, who hadn't said more than 6 words since arriving, set up a laptop and pulled files. The case against Medcor had enough for civil liability, but not enough for criminal prosecution. The chain of custody for the contaminated equipment was documented. The financial trail between Medcor's executives and Sauer was circumstantial, but building. What they were missing was a credible witness who had direct experience with the compromised equipment in the field, someone who had filed a complaint at the time, whose complaint could be shown to have been deliberately suppressed, who could speak to the direct medical consequences of the defective supplies. I can be that witness, Maya said. You can, Torres said, and your testimony combined with what we have would likely be enough. He paused. But there's a complication. She waited. Your general discharge, he said. The circumstances of it. She went still. We've reviewed your record, Torres said. His voice was careful, not cruel, but it was the carefulness of a person delivering something they knew would land hard. In 2020, you filed a complaint through official channels about the equipment failures. 3 weeks after that complaint was documented, you received a negative performance review, your first, from your commanding officer, Captain Richard Knowles. He watched her face. 6 weeks after that, you were brought up on a conduct charge related to insubordination. The charge was sustained. You were given the option of a general discharge. I know what happened, she said. Captain Knowles is William Sauer's former college roommate, Torres said. They've maintained contact. Knowles now works as a consultant for Medcor Supply Solutions. She sat with that. The architecture of it was so clean it was almost elegant. She'd filed a complaint that threatened a contract. The contract's beneficiary had a friend. The friend had a friend. And Maya Collins, combat medic, decorated twice, 4 clean deployments before that, had been handed a general discharge and shown the door with a conduct charge on her record that made everything she said afterward easier to dismiss. She had not connected those pieces at the time. She had been 26 and exhausted and worn down by the preceding months in a way that made the discharge feel almost like relief, and she had taken it and walked away and told herself she was done with all of it. "Knowles' personnel file," Vasquez said without looking up from her laptop. The conduct charge against Collins was filed 11 days after Knowles had a documented phone call with Sauer. The call log is in the federal procurement records. Maya looked at Vasquez. "How long have you had that?" 8 months, Vasquez said, and nobody reached out to me. Torres said, "We couldn't locate you initially. You left service, you moved, you changed your phone number twice. By the time we found the Portland address and confirmed your employment here, you were watching me." "Monitoring, yes. We wanted to understand the full picture before we made contact." He met her eyes. "I'm aware that's not a satisfying answer." "It's not," she said, "but it's an honest one, so keep going." Tashab. The complication, Torres explained, was the defense. MedCorp's legal team had been anticipating the investigation for months. They had people inside the federal system, nothing provably criminal but enough to get early signals. And they were preparing a counter-narrative. Part of that narrative would focus on discrediting potential witnesses. Maya's general discharge would be the first thing they went after. They would characterize her as a disgruntled former service member with a documented conduct problem and a personal grievance against the military procurement process. "Which is what Hale is building right now," Maya said. Torres looked at her. "Victor Hale," she said. "He's been filing complaints against me with the state nursing board. If there's a public record of me being dismissed for conduct issues from this hospital on top of the military discharge, MedCorp's attorneys will use both." She paused. "Hale's brother-in-law is William Sauer, which means Hale has either been told I'm a potential witness or someone put Sauer and Hale in a room together recently and my name came up." Torres and Vasquez exchanged a look. "We don't have evidence of direct communication between Hale and Sauer regarding you specifically," Torres said carefully. "But you're not ruling it out." "No." She stood up and moved to the window. The parking lot outside was mostly empty, the overhead lights casting orange pools on wet asphalt. Portland at midnight looked the same as it always did. Damp, indifferent, going about its business. "I need to know something," she said. "Go ahead." "Reyes, his injury. Why did you bring him to this hospital specifically?" A beat of silence. She turned from the window. Garrett was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Torres had gone careful again. "Harbor Ridge has one of 3 certified Level 1 trauma bays in this part of the city," Torres said. And we knew you worked here." She let that sit for a moment. "You brought him here because you wanted to see how I'd respond." "We brought him here because it was the closest Level 1 center when his condition dropped, and we made the best call available to us." Garrett's voice was even, but there was something underneath it. Something that sounded like the beginning of a long argument he'd had with himself. "What happened when you walked outside and we recognized you was contingent?" "Contingent?" she said. "Yes. He could have died." "He nearly did." She looked at Garrett. He looked back at her. He didn't look away, which she respected because what she'd just said was true, and he knew it, and pretending otherwise would have been the worst thing he could have done. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "He didn't," she said. "Let's stay in the present." At 1 a.m., Torres made a call. He stepped into the hallway, and she could hear the low cadence of his voice, but not the words. And when he came back, his expression had changed. Not dramatically, but the way a room changes when someone opens a window. "I need to tell you what's happening outside this building," he said. He sat back down. 20 minutes ago, our field team monitoring Sauer's communications flagged a call. Sauer called the Harbor Ridge CEO directly. The name landed. Maya recognized it. Ronald Farber, who ran Harbor Ridge with the particular vision of a hospital administrator who thought of the institution primarily as a financial entity. "What did Sauer say?" Maya asked. "We're still decrypting the full recording," Torres said. But the summary from the analyst on shift is that Sauer told Farber there was a federal witness situation developing at the hospital involving a nurse, and that it would be in Harbor Ridge's best interest to move quickly on the pending disciplinary action. "Move quickly," she said. "Terminate, not suspend," Vasquez said from the laptop. He used the word terminate. The shape of it was becoming clearer. Hale pushing from inside, Sauer pushing from outside, Farber in the middle deciding what his hospital's best interest looked like. And Maya sitting in a consultation room at 1 in the morning with no badge and no standing, and a conduct flag on her nursing record that was going to look very reasonable by morning if nobody stopped it. "I need to make a call," she said. "To who?" Torres asked. She thought of Priya. She thought of the pump log timestamp. She thought of Dave, who had looked at the pump rate when she'd said to look, and who she suspected had told someone about it afterward, because Dave was not the kind of person who could sit on something like that. "To someone who has evidence," she said. Torres nodded slowly. "We can protect—" "I'm not asking you to protect her," Maya said. "I'm asking you to let me make a private call." He looked at her for a moment, then stood and gestured for Vasquez to follow him into the hallway. She called Priya. Priya answered on the second ring, which meant she wasn't asleep, which meant she'd been waiting. "They're moving tonight," Maya said. "Hale and whoever he's talking to. If you have the pump log—" "I already sent it," Priya said. "I forwarded it to my personal email and saved a screenshot to my phone when you hung up earlier." A pause. "I also talked to Dave. He documented it. He sent his incident notes to the charge nurse and CC'd the nursing supervisor. He said he wasn't going to let it get buried." Maya was quiet for a moment. "He's going to catch hell for that," she said. "He said he knew." Another pause. "Maya, what's actually happening? There are military people in the building, and the charge nurse got a call from administration telling her not to discuss any incidents involving you with anyone." "How recent was that call?" "About an hour ago," which was after Sauer's call to Farber. The timeline was closing up. Someone was moving pieces, and they were moving them fast enough that it felt like urgency, which meant they were worried. "I need you to do one more thing," Maya said. "Tell me." "Patricia Holst, in the ICU. Can you find out if she's coherent? If she's been able to speak to anyone?" "Hold on." She heard Priya moving, the soft sounds of a unit at night. A minute passed. Then, "She's alert. Her daughter is with her. She's been asking about what happened in room 4. Apparently nobody has given her a clear answer about why her condition crashed." Maya thought about that. "I'll call you back," she said, and hung up. Bye-bye. She found Torres in the hallway and told him what she needed. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. What she was proposing was not standard procedure, and he clearly knew it. But he also clearly understood that the window they were working in was narrowing. "If Farber acts on Sauer's call before morning," she said, "I lose whatever standing I have in this building. The nursing board complaint gets legs. The conduct narrative solidifies." She paused. "But right now, tonight, I have a patient who can speak. I have documented pump settings with timestamps. I have 2 nurses and a physician who saw what actually happened in room 4. And I have you. What do you want from me right now, specifically? I want you to make a call to whoever you need to call to freeze the personnel action against me. Not permanently, just until your investigation can get there. If Sauer is directing Hale through Farber, that's obstruction. You know it, and I know it." Torres looked at the floor for a moment. It was the look of a person doing math. "If I do that," he said, "it signals to Sauer that we're aware of the call. He'll know the communication was monitored. Is that a problem? It accelerates things." "Then let's accelerate them," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You've done this before," he said. "Not medicine. This. Operational decision-making under pressure with incomplete information." "I've done a lot of things," she said. He pulled out his phone. "Thank you." What came next happened in a compressed sequence that felt less like a series of events and more like a pressure front moving through. Torres made 2 calls. Vasquez made 1. Garrett spent 20 minutes on a secure line and came back with his jaw set in a way that meant whatever he'd been told had changed the shape of the evening. At 2:14 a.m., Torres received a confirmation that a federal hold had been placed on Maya's personnel action pending investigation. It was not public, not announced, and by design invisible to Farber until someone withstanding told him directly. At 2:31 a.m., the ICU charge nurse came to the waiting area and told them that Commander Reyes was stable and had been asking for Garrett. They went up. Reyes was awake. Not fully. The sedation still had weight in his face, but his eyes were tracking, and when Garrett came to the bedside, he made a sound that was probably supposed to be a word. "Don't," Garrett said. "Just stay still." Reyes's eyes moved to Maya standing near the doorway. "Falcon," he said. "Rough. Barely there." "You said that already," she said. "Go to sleep." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face, and then the sedation pulled him back under and his eyes closed. She stood there for a moment. She hadn't been in a room with a patient she'd pulled back from the edge in a long time, not since she'd left service. There was a specific quality to it, not satisfaction exactly, something quieter, the feeling of a thing that mattered having been handled. She turned to go and found Garrett behind her. "The name," he said quietly. "Falcon. You never told me where it came from." "No," she said. "I didn't." She walked past him into the hallway. Well, at 3 a.m., the night turned. She was in the consultation room with Torres and Vasquez, working through the timeline of events they needed for the formal witness statement, when Vasquez's laptop pinged. Vasquez looked at the screen. Her expression didn't change dramatically, but it tightened, which on Vasquez was the equivalent of someone else standing up quickly. "We have a problem," Vasquez said. Torres moved around the table to look at the screen. Maya looked at Vasquez directly. "MedCorps filed an emergency motion tonight," Vasquez said, 2 hours ago, with a federal judge in the D.C. district. They're claiming the investigation is procedurally compromised and seeking an injunction to halt evidence collection. "On what grounds?" Torres asked. "Chain of custody violations in the documentary evidence. They're claiming 2 of the supply manifests were obtained without proper warrant coverage." Vasquez scrolled. "The motion was filed by Harmon and Litch." Torres said something under his breath. "Who's Harmon and Litch?" Maya asked. "The largest federal defense firm in the country," he said. "They have 7 partners who are former DOJ. He straightened up. "They've been waiting for us to move. The moment I placed that hold on your personnel file, something pinged in their monitoring. So Sauer told MedCorps we were here. Within the hour, yes." She looked at the window again. The parking lot outside was still mostly dark and empty. A security vehicle was making a slow pass around the perimeter. Ordinary. Everything out there looked completely ordinary. "How long do we have before the injunction is decided?" she asked. "Emergency motion like this, with their resources, judge could rule within 24 hours. And if the injunction holds? Evidence collection stops. Any personnel actions they want to take against you are back in play. The case goes back to the pre-investigation stage, and MedCorps' attorneys file a separate action against the methodology." He said it without inflection. "We'd be set back 12 to 18 months minimum. 22 names in that folder. Waverly's name, 12 to 18 months. Then we need to move before the injunction," she said. "We don't have enough for an arrest. I'm not talking about an arrest." She turned from the window. "I'm talking about Hale. If Sauer contacted Hale, and that can be documented, and if Hale then took action against me in response to Sauer's instruction, that's a direct evidentiary link between MedCorps' network and an attempt to interfere with a federal witness." Torres was still. "If I go to Hale," she said, "and I ask him directly to retract the nursing board complaint, on record, and he refuses, or if he says something that ties back to Sauer, that's not evidence collection, that's a conversation. Your injunction doesn't touch conversations." "That's not how this is supposed to work," Torres said. "I know," she said, "but Reyes is upstairs with a drain in his abdomen, and 22 people are in a folder and the lawyers are already moving." She met Torres's eyes. "You've been building this case for 14 months. You have 1 night before a judge possibly closes it. Tell me what's supposed to work." The silence between them lasted long enough to be real. Vasquez said quietly, without looking up, "Her nursing license gives her standing to request a meeting with the attending physician regarding the complaint he filed." That's a routine HR process. Nothing about that is connected to our investigation. Torres looked at Vasquez. Vasquez did not look back at Torres. Torres looked at Maya. If he says anything that's useful, he said, you call me the moment the conversation ends. I know how this works, she said. She picked up her jacket from the chair. Hale comes in for early rounds at 5:30, she said. He's always early. He thinks it makes him look dedicated. She put her jacket on. I have 2 hours. She left the consultation room and walked down the hallway toward the elevator. She pressed the button and waited. And when the doors opened and she stepped inside, she caught her reflection in the steel panel opposite. No badge, no official standing, no institutional protection, just her face and her jacket and whatever she'd been carrying for 4 years that had just found a direction to point. The doors closed. The elevator rose. And on the 3rd floor in a supply corridor adjacent to the trauma unit, Dr. Victor Hale stepped out of a stairwell he'd clearly entered from the parking structure, still in his street clothes, at 3 a.m, 4 hours before his scheduled rounds, and walked briskly toward the nursing station with his phone pressed to his ear and the particular focused expression of a man who had been told to do something and had come to do it. She saw him before he saw her. That was a habit so old it had stopped feeling like a choice. The automatic scan of a space when you entered it, the cataloging of who was where and which direction they were facing and what the exits looked like. She'd tried to stop doing it when she'd left service. She hadn't managed it. She'd just gotten better at making it look like she was checking her phone. Hale was moving fast for a man in street clothes at 3 a.m. Dark jacket, no badge visible, phone still at his ear. He turned into the supply corridor and she pressed herself back into the shadow of the elevator alcove without thinking about it. The movement purely instinctual, the way her body remembered things her mind had tried to put down. She could hear one side of his conversation, just fragments. Already in the building, I don't know how. Yes, I understand what you're telling me, Bill. I'm here now. I'll handle it. Bill. William Sauer. She listened until the corridor swallowed his voice, then waited 10 seconds and followed. He went into the nursing station. She could see him through the interior window. He was at the terminal now, typing something, and the night nurse on station was standing back with the expression of someone who had been told to leave without being told to leave. Hale's badge gave him access to the record system. His hands moved quickly. Not the considered pace of a physician reviewing cases, the speed of a person deleting something. She pulled out her phone. Torres picked up on the first ring. 3rd floor nursing station, she said quietly. He's at the records terminal, right now. He came in through the parking structure stairs. A half-second pause. Is there a security camera on that station? There should be, southwest corner, above the door. I'm calling security oversight now. Don't go in. I know, she said. She didn't put her phone away. She held it at her side with the line open and watched Hale through the window. He typed, he scrolled, he typed again. Then he pulled a USB drive from his jacket pocket, and she felt something cold move through her chest because that was not a physician behavior. That was not even an administrator behavior. That was the behavior of a person who had been told specifically what to take and had come to take it. She walked through the door. He heard her and turned, and the expression that crossed his face moved through several phases fast. Surprise, recognition, irritation, and then something underneath all of those that she recognized as fear, wearing the mask of anger. Collins, he said, you don't have authorization to be in this building. I'm a nurse at this facility, she said. The federal hold on my personnel action was placed at 2:14 this morning, so technically I'm still on staff. She looked at the USB drive in his hand. That's not. He closed his hand around it. I don't know what you think you're seeing, he said. I'm seeing a physician accessing records at 3 a.m. from a terminal that logs every keystroke after arriving through a stairwell that has camera coverage 20 minutes after his brother-in-law called the hospital CEO. She kept her voice even. I'm seeing the second consequential mistake you've made tonight. Get out of this station. What's the first mistake? She asked. He stared at her. The first mistake, she said, was calling the nursing board this afternoon, because that created a documented timestamp of you initiating action against me within hours of your brother-in-law learning my name was connected to a federal investigation. She took one step toward the terminal. The board complaint, the pump incident, the record you just pulled up, When those three things sit next to each other in a timeline, they don't look like a physician protecting patient safety. They look like a coordinated attempt to discredit a witness. The blood had left Hale's face in the particular way that happened when the blood was needed somewhere else, when the body was redirecting resources to the part of the brain that was trying very hard to find a way out of a room that had just become much smaller. "I want you to leave," he said. His voice had changed. Not the physician's authority anymore. Something thinner. "The USB drive," she said. "Set it on the counter." "I will call security." "There's already someone calling security," she said, "and they're not calling on your behalf." What happened next was not dramatic in the way it might have been scripted. There was no confrontation that peaked and broke. There was the sound of the elevator opening down the hall, and then Torres was there with a hospital security supervisor named Okonkwo, who had the patient expression of a man who had been woken up and briefed and was professionally committed to doing the right thing regardless of the hour or the inconvenience. Behind them, a woman Maya didn't recognize, federal credentials, civilian suit, moved to the terminal and placed herself between Hale and the keyboard. Hale looked at Torres's credentials. He looked at Okonkwo. He looked at the woman at the terminal. He looked at Maya last. She watched him work through it, the calculation happening behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of whether there was still a version of this that he could manage or explain or survive professionally. She had seen that calculation before. She had seen it in different people in different circumstances, and it always looked the same. The moment when a person who had spent years operating from institutional authority realized the institution was no longer behind them. "I'd like to call my attorney," he said. "That's your right," Torres said. "Okonkwo, is there a private space we can use?" "Conference room B on this floor," Okonkwo said. They moved Hale out of the nursing station. The federal agent at the terminal was already working, her fingers moving with precise efficiency across the keyboard, capturing the session log. Maya stood in the doorway and watched the station settle back into its nighttime quiet. The night nurse, a young man named Aaron who looked about 24 and had spent the last 10 minutes being extremely still, appeared from the corner where he'd retreated. Are we... He stopped. "What do I do right now?" "Document everything you observed," Maya said. "Time, what you saw, what was said. Write it down before you forget the details." She paused. "Then go back to work. Your patients still need you." He nodded quickly and reached for his notepad. She went to the nursing station, not to the terminal, but to the window that looked out over the floor, and stood there for a moment. The trauma unit was doing what it always did at 3 a.m., moving at the quiet but unrelenting pace of a place that never fully stopped. A monitor beeped in an even rhythm 2 rooms down. Someone was getting a blood draw. The ordinary mechanics of the place went on underneath everything else the way a river went on underneath ice. Her hands were steady. She noticed that the way you noticed a thing you'd been braced against and then hadn't needed to brace against. Torres found her 20 minutes later in the hallway outside the conference room. He looked like a man who had processed a great deal of information very quickly and was now organizing it into usable categories. "He lawyered up immediately," Torres said, "which is his right and frankly what I'd have told him to do." "Did you get the drive?" "Agent Kamau secured it before he could do anything with it. It was already in the system, Polk. He'd transferred 3 files before you interrupted him." "What files?" "Incident report from room 4, the pump calibration log, and the original complaint record from your first disciplinary meeting with HR." He paused. He was attempting to overwrite them with modified versions. The system timestamps would have been intact, but the content would have changed. She processed that. "How much did he get?" "The room 4 incident report was partially overwritten. The other 2 he hadn't touched yet." "Can you recover what he changed?" "IT forensics is on it now. The original server backup cycles at 6 a.m., so everything that existed before he touched it is still in the shadow copy." Torres looked at her steadily. "This is not nothing, Collins. A physician accessing records after hours and attempting to alter documented evidence, that's not a workplace conduct issue. That's criminal." "I know." "The USB drive is going to the lab. If it has prior copies of modified documents, records of other things he's changed before tonight. Then this opens up significantly? She thought about Gerald Bauer and his borderline troponin. She thought about the last nurse who'd questioned Hale, who'd ended up in Central Supply for 3 months. She thought about how many incident reports passed through Hale's sphere of influence in a year, how many of them reflected his version of events, because his version was the one with institutional backing. The nursing board complaint, she said. Can that be withdrawn? If he withdraws it voluntarily, yes. If he doesn't, our JAG attorney is preparing documentation showing the complaint was filed in retaliation for potential witness activity. That's a stronger outcome legally, actually. It becomes part of the obstruction record. She nodded slowly. Go get some sleep, Torres said. No. Collins? I want to be here when it pulls the backup, she said. And I want to see what's on the drive. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked back toward the conference room. The IT forensic specialist arrived at 4:15. Her name was Kenji Abrantes, a slight, meticulous man in his 30s who wore his hair in a short ponytail and carried a laptop bag and a portable drive unit that looked like something built specifically for this kind of work. He set up at a workstation in the IT closet on the 3rd floor, and Torres gave him the USB drive in an evidence bag, and Abrantes looked at it the way craftspeople look at a problem they already know how to solve. Maya sat in a chair outside the IT closet door and waited. Garrett appeared from somewhere around 4:30 and sat down next to her without saying anything. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that existed between people who were waiting for the same information and had already said everything that was immediately relevant. Reyes was asking for a status update, Garrett said eventually. On what? On you. On what was happening. He paused. He told Okoye you were the best combat medic he'd seen in the field, that you'd worked on a team that went into situations where official medical support was compromised, and you improvised in conditions that would have broken most people. She didn't say anything. He said you lost someone once, Garrett said, that you took it badly. Everyone takes it badly, she said. He said you blamed yourself for years. He said it wasn't your fault. A pause. He said the equipment... I know, she said. Torres told me. Garrett was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. For what it's worth. It's worth something, she said. Not enough, but something. That was all they said about it. Abrantes came out of the IT closet at 5 o'clock with a printed summary that he handed to Torres without preamble. 14 files on the drive, Abrantes said. 11 of them are modified versions of hospital records, incident reports, nursing evaluations, chart notes. Each one has a corresponding original in the system backup. I've done a preliminary comparison. He tapped the summary. In every case, the modification removes or reduces references to nursing staff recommendations that were documented but not acted on by the attending. In 6 of the cases, the modifications add language attributing clinical decisions to nursing error. Torres read the summary. His face was doing the careful thing. How far back do the original files go? Maya asked. Abrantes looked at her. The oldest is from 22 months ago. 22 months. She had been working at Harbor Ridge for 24. Can you tell who created the modified files? Torres asked. Terminal access logs show his credentials for each one, but 3 of the modifications were made remotely, from outside the hospital network. Abrantes paused. The remote access happened on dates that correspond to the nursing board complaint process against a previous Harbor Ridge employee named Trish Warfield. Maya remembered the name from what Priya had told her. The nurse who'd questioned Hale, who'd ended up in Central Supply. Warfield left the hospital 8 months ago, Maya said. Voluntarily? Torres asked. That's what the file will say, she said. Torres looked at the summary, then at the ceiling briefly, then at Maya. I need to make some calls, he said. Bassam. The morning arrived the way mornings did after nights without sleep. Not with any particular gentleness, the light just appearing in the windows and everything getting slightly harder to process at once. The hospital shifted gears audibly, the sounds changing from the quiet of third shift to the more populated noise of day's beginning, carts moving, voices multiplying in the hallways. At 6:45 a.m., an administrator Maya didn't recognize walked past the nursing station with the particular directed pace of someone who had a specific destination and a specific task. He was carrying a folder. He went to the conference room where Torres had been working for the past hour, and he knocked and went in, and through the glass panel Maya could see him setting the folder on the table. Torres came out 10 minutes later. "Harbor Ridge CEO," Torres said. "Ronald Farber. He's here." She straightened. "He came in early," Torres said. His assistant called at 6 a.m. requesting a meeting with whoever was in charge of the federal action. He paused. "The hospital's general counsel is with him. He's trying to get ahead of it." "Smart play, actually," Torres said. "If the hospital cooperates formally with the investigation, they get positioned as a victim of Hale's conduct rather than a facilitating institution." He looked at her steadily. "Which means they're going to distance themselves from every decision Hale made, including what happened to you." She processed that. "What does that mean for the nursing board complaint?" she asked. "Farber's counsel already called the board at 6:30 this morning," Torres said. "They're withdrawing the hospital's support for Hale's filing." She sat with that for a moment. It was not satisfaction. It was more complicated than satisfaction. The particular feeling of watching something you knew was true become officially acknowledged, which was a different thing from vindication, and a messier one. "He's going to lose his position," she said. It wasn't a question. "The board is meeting at 8, Torres said. "With what we have and with the hospital's cooperation, yes. His surgical privileges will be suspended pending investigation." He paused. "The criminal exposure for the records tampering is a separate process, but it's moving." She nodded. "Collins," Torres said, "there's something else." She looked at him. "Farber wants to speak with you directly," he said, "before the board meeting." She had not slept. She had not eaten anything since the previous morning, and the coffee she'd had at midnight had done nothing useful except keep her upright. She was aware of all of these things the way you are aware of systems running below capacity. She knew it, she accounted for it, she kept going. Farber was a tall man in his early 60s, the kind of executive who had the permanent appearance of having just come from a meeting. His general counsel was a woman named Patricia Lund, who had the compressed, efficient manner of a person who existed professionally to prevent other people from saying things they shouldn't say. Farber looked at Maya across the conference table. "Ms. Collins," he said, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him. She didn't say anything. "I was contacted yesterday by an outside party and advised that there was a situation involving a nurse on staff that required swift administrative action," he said. "I acted on that advice without conducting proper due diligence." He paused. "That was an error in judgment, and it contributed to a significant injustice to you." Lund was watching Maya with the careful attention of someone cataloging every word being said. "I hear that," Maya said. "I'd like to discuss reinstatement," Farber said, "with full back pay for the suspension period and a formal correction to your personnel record." "I'd like that too," she said. "But I want something else first." Farber waited. "Trish Warfield," she said, "the nurse who left 8 months ago. I want someone to find her and explain to her that her personnel record has been altered and that the hospital is aware of it." She paused. "And I want every case Hale has managed in the last 2 years reviewed by a neutral third party. Not internal review. External." Farber glanced at Lund. Lund said carefully, "Those are significant commitments." "I know," Maya said, "and they're non-negotiable." Farber looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression of a man recalculating something. Not the math of what it would cost, but the math of what it meant that this was the list she'd given him. "All right," he said. The board meeting convened at 8 in the morning in the 6th-floor boardroom with 6 members present, Farber at the head of the table, Lund adjacent with the documentation Torres's team had provided, and Dr. Victor Hale seated on one side with his attorney, a local firm, not Harmon and Litch, which suggested Sauer had not extended his resources to cover Hale's personal legal situation. Maya was not in the room. She sat in the hallway outside with Priya, who had appeared at 7:45 with 2 cups of coffee and the look of someone who had not been to sleep either. They sat in the institutional chairs that lined the hallway and drank their coffee. "Dave is okay," Priya said. "In case you were wondering, administration called him this morning about his incident report. He said he was documenting accurately and he wasn't going to change it." "Good." "He was shaking when I talked to him, but he said it." Priya wrapped both hands around her cup. "People are scared of what happens next. Half the night shift was talking this morning. Everyone knows something happened, but nobody has the full picture." "The full picture will be available," Maya said. "Eventually." Priya was quiet for a moment. "I've worked here for 6 years," she said. "I've watched Hale operate for 4 of them. And I knew, we all knew, in the way that you know something without saying it out loud, that things didn't always go the way the chart said they went when he was involved." She stopped. "I should have said something before." "You said something when it mattered," Maya said. "You were already out the door." "The timing wasn't on you," Maya said. "The system was built to make it hard for the timing to be right." She looked at the boardroom door. That's what these cases are actually about. Not one bad doctor. The system that made it easier to protect him than to protect the patients. Priya was quiet for a long time. "What happens to you now?" she asked. "I go back to work," Maya said. "Here?" "I don't know yet." The boardroom door opened at 9:12. Lund came out first, then the board members, and then Hale with his attorney. Hale moved differently than he had the night before. The particular quality of presence that he usually carried, the sense of a man who occupied space with authority, was gone. He looked like a person who had put a coat on over something unraveling. His attorney was speaking to him in a low voice, and he was walking without appearing to register the hallway around him. He passed her. He slowed. He stopped. She looked at him. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything either. There was nothing left between them that words were suited for, and they both seemed to understand that at the same moment. His attorney touched his arm, and they moved on. Lund stopped in front of Maya. "The board has voted to suspend Dr. Hale's surgical privileges pending investigation," she said. "He has been asked to vacate the premises and surrender his credentials. An independent review of his case files going back 30 months will begin by end of week." She paused. "You are formally reinstated with full privileges as of this morning, subject to your agreement on the terms discussed with Mr. Farber." "I agree to the terms," Maya said. "We'll have documentation to you within the hour." Lund moved away. Priya made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "That's it? He just walks out?" "The criminal process is separate," Maya said. "And it's moving." She stood up. "He doesn't walk far." Torres found her at 10 o'clock in the same family consultation room that had become, over the course of the night, an unofficial operations base. He had slept, briefly, she guessed, on a couch somewhere, and had the slightly assembled look of a person who had addressed the most urgent situations and was now moving to the next tier. He sat down across from her. "Sour," she said. "Moving," he said. "The phone call to Farber, combined with the connection to Hale's records tampering, gives us a documented chain of obstruction. Our attorney filed an emergency response to the injunction at 7 this morning. We're arguing the injunction itself is an instrument of ongoing witness intimidation, given the timing and Sour's involvement." He paused. "The judge has asked both parties for a response by noon." "And MedCorp?" "Their attorneys are very busy this morning," he said. "The injunction play may have been premature on their part. It showed us exactly what they were worried about and when." "What about my testimony? Is it still more important than ever?" he said. "Your complaint, the suppression of it, Waverly's death, the Knowles connection to Sour. That's the human narrative the case needs. Documents prove the architecture. You're the person who was inside it." She nodded. "I need to ask you something," Torres said. He leaned forward slightly. "When we eventually move on Sour and the MedCorp executives, the defense is going to focus heavily on your general discharge. They're going to call Knowles. They're going to argue the insubordination charge was legitimate, and your discharge reflects a pattern of conduct that undermines your credibility." "I know. Is there anything in the discharge circumstance that I should know before they put it in front of a court?" She looked at the table. She thought about the day she'd been handed the paperwork. She thought about how she'd signed it because fighting it would have taken months she didn't have in a system she no longer trusted. And because she'd been 26 and tired in the deep way that people got tired when they'd been carrying something for too long. I was insubordinate, she said. Torres waited. Knowles told me to stop pursuing the equipment complaint through official channels, she said. He said the investigation was handled and the matter was closed. I told him to his face that he was wrong and that the equipment had killed a Marine and that the contract needed to be reviewed. She paused. In front of 2 other officers. That's the insubordination. Yes. Torres nodded slowly. I'd do it again, she said. I know, he said. So would I. He picked up his phone. I'm going to call Knowles's former unit members. If you were willing to say that in front of 2 officers, someone else remembers it. She hadn't thought about that. She sat with it for a moment. The idea that the act she'd been punished for might also be the thing that supported her. There's one more thing, Torres said. He pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward her. This came in 40 minutes ago from our team monitoring MedCorps communications. She read the message. It was a transcript excerpt. 22 words from a text message sent from a number registered to a MedCorps executive at 5 this morning. The 22 words were, "She's the problem. If the nurse goes away, the whole thing goes away. Make sure the federal case has nothing to stand on." She read it twice. They're not talking about your testimony, Torres said. They're talking about your physical safety. The room was very still. She set the phone down on the table. How credible is this? She said. Credible enough that I have 2 people outside this building and 1 in this hallway, he said. And credible enough that I'm telling you about it directly rather than handling it quietly. She processed that. She had not been afraid in the consultation room at 1 in the morning or at the nursing station when Hale had been standing there with the USB drive. She felt something now, not fear exactly, but the recognition of a situation becoming more serious than it had been, the recalibration of the risk level upward. All right, she said. All right? What do you need me to do? She said. Torres looked at her. He had the expression of a person who had been doing this work for a long time and had not always been surprised by the people who sat across from him in difficult moments, and who was, in this particular instance, surprised. For now, he said, stay in this building. Don't go anywhere without letting me know. She nodded. Torres's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and the expression on his face changed. Not dramatically, just the slight reconfiguration that meant incoming information that shifted the picture. He answered. He listened for 45 seconds without speaking. When he put the phone down, he looked at her directly. William Sauer was picked up at Dulles Airport 40 minutes ago, he said. He had a one-way ticket to Lisbon. She stared at him. He wasn't running from us, Torres said carefully. Our team traced the communication that flagged last night. The one about your safety. The sender was a MedCorps executive named Dale Pruitt. He paused. Sauer found out about that text an hour ago, and apparently he decided that his association with MedCorps had just become a different category of problem. He was going to run, she said. He made it as far as the gate. She looked at the table. She looked at the window. She looked at nothing in particular for a moment. If Sauer cooperates, Torres said, the timeline of everything, the buried complaints, Knowles, Hale, MedCorps, compresses significantly. His testimony from the inside of the procurement process is worth more than 3 years of document gathering. Will he cooperate? He's already talking, Torres said. He's been talking since they sat him down. He's been on the inside of this for 5 years and apparently decided that Pruitt's text was the moment where he was no longer comfortable with the direction of things. She breathed. He's going to give them everything, she said. It wasn't a question. Everything, Torres confirmed. She sat back in the chair. The consultation room was very quiet. The same room it had been 8 hours ago when Garrett had left her with the JAG document, and she'd sat alone deciding what to do with it. There's something you should know, Torres said. His voice had shifted slightly. Less operational, more considered. When Sauer's full statement comes out, it's going to include the Knowles complaint. It's going to include the names of everyone who knew the equipment was defective and made decisions anyway. He paused. Waverly's name will be in it. The other 21 names will be in it. It's going to be public. She looked at him. I know that's not nothing, he said. For you. It's what it should have been 4 years ago, she said. It's late, but it's what it should be. Torres nodded. His phone buzzed on the table between them. They both looked at it. The text was from Vasquez. Judge denied the injunction. Full evidence collection authorized. You need to see what Abrantes just pulled from the MedCore server. Torres picked up the phone. Read the next message. And the one after that. His face did something she hadn't seen it do yet, something that in another person she might have called disbelief. But in Torres looked more like a person arriving at a number that was larger than the number they'd been expecting to arrive at. He turned the screen toward her. She read, the MedCore server records, accessed under the now cleared federal warrant, contain not 22 incidents, but 67. 67 documented cases of compromised or defective military medical equipment, spread across 6 years and 4 different overseas theaters. 67 names that hadn't been in the folder Torres had shown her. 67 names that had been buried under procurement reports and contract renewals and the ordinary institutional machinery of a system that had decided protecting a contractor was more important than protecting the people the contractor was supposed to serve. She sat with the number. Then she looked up at Torres and said the only thing there was left to say. We need to make sure every single one of those families finds out what actually happened. Torres held her gaze for a moment. That's already in motion, he said quietly. His phone buzzed again, and this time when he read it, he turned the screen toward her without a word. And the name on the message was not Vasquez, and not Garrett, and not anyone from the federal team. The name was Trish Warfield, and the message said, I saw the news alerts. I kept copies of everything. I've been waiting for someone to ask. Torres texted Warfield back immediately, thumbs moving fast. Don't send anything digitally yet? Can you come in person? The reply took 40 seconds. I'm in the parking lot. I've been here since 6. Trish Warfield was 34 and looked like someone who had spent 8 months rebuilding herself from a specific kind of damage. The kind that came not from a single event, but from the slow accumulation of being told, institutionally and repeatedly, that her perception of reality was incorrect. She was compact, with short natural hair and the particular stillness of a person who had learned to be careful about how much they showed in their face. She carried a backpack over one shoulder and a canvas tote bag that clinked slightly when she moved, and when Torres brought her into the consultation room and she saw Maya sitting at the table, something in her expression broke open briefly before she controlled it. You're Collins, she said. Yes. Warfield set the tote bag on the table. Inside it, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, were folders, printed documents, not digital. She'd gone old school, the way people went old school when they'd learned that digital records could disappear. I didn't know what to do with these when I left, she said. She sat down. I was so worn down by that point that I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd misread things. She put her hands flat on the table. But I kept them anyway. I don't know why exactly. Insurance, maybe. Or I just couldn't let it go. What's in there? Torres asked. 11 months of documentation, Warfield said. My own incident notes, copies of charts before and after Hale signed off, emails between me and the charge nurse about discrepancies, and, she paused, a recording. The room went still. I have a small recorder, she said. I started carrying it after the 3rd time Hale told me in private that my nursing assessments were inadequate and then told the team something different in rounds. I wanted a record of what he actually said to me versus what he said on paper. She pulled a small digital recorder from the front pocket of the backpack. I have 6 recordings. 4 of them are conversations where he explicitly tells me to document patient observations differently than what I observed. One of them is him telling me that if I continued to be a problem, he would make sure I didn't work in this city again. Torres and Maya looked at each other. Vasquez, who had been standing near the door, walked forward and sat down. Ms. Warfield, Torres said carefully, I need to ask you about the legality of these recordings in Oregon. Oregon is a one-party consent state, Warfield said. She said it the way someone said a thing they'd looked up many times. I was a participant in every conversation. I've already talked to an attorney. When? Maya asked. 4 months ago. I called a lawyer 4 months ago and asked what I'd need if I ever decided to come forward. She looked at Maya directly. I just didn't know who to come forward to, or if anyone would listen. Maya looked at the recorder on the table. We're listening, she said. The next 3 hours were the most concentrated period of legal activity Maya had ever sat adjacent to. Vasquez handled Warfield's documentation with the careful efficiency of someone who understood that the chain of custody on every piece of paper mattered enormously. Abrantes came in and copied the digital recorder's contents to a secured drive while the originals remained with Warfield. Torres was on the phone in 15-minute cycles, stepping into the hallway and coming back with new information each time. The federal prosecutor's office in Portland had opened a formal case file. The MedCorps investigation had been elevated to a joint task force. Sauer's cooperation agreement was being drafted in D.C. with 3 government attorneys in the room. Warfield sat through all of it with the focused patience of someone who had been waiting a long time and was not going to squander the moment by being impatient now. She answered questions when asked. She was precise, and she did not embellish. She knew which details mattered and which didn't, which was the mark of a person who had gone over these events in their own mind so many times that the narrative had been refined down to what was real. At one point, during a brief quiet while Torres was in the hallway, Warfield looked at Maya and said, "Did they tell you about the complaint I filed before I left?" Hale filed a counter-complaint through HR that characterized you as a conduct problem, Maya said. He told Farber I'd been accessing patient records outside my role, Warfield said, which was true. I was pulling charts to check my documentation against what was being entered by the attending. But the reason I was doing it was because things were being changed. She paused. They used the fact that I was looking for the problem as evidence that I was the problem. Maya recognized the architecture of that. It was the same one they'd tried to build around her. You file a complaint. The complaint becomes evidence of your instability. Your instability is then the reason nothing you say can be trusted. It's a closed loop, Maya said. Yes, Warfield said. And the only way out of it is if someone else sees what you're seeing, because alone you just look paranoid. She said it without self-pity. It was an observation about a mechanism, not a complaint about her own experience, and Maya found that more affecting than if it had been the other way around. You're not alone now, Maya said. Warfield looked at the folders on the table. No, she said. I guess I'm not. Torres came back from the hallway at noon and sat down and put his phone face down on the table, which meant he had something to say and wanted to say it without interruption. The federal prosecutor has reviewed the Warfield recordings, he said. Combined with the MedCorps server data, Sauer's ongoing cooperation, and the records tampering evidence from last night, they have enough to move. He paused. Criminal charges against Dale Pruitt and 2 other MedCorps executives will be filed this afternoon. Obstruction, procurement fraud, and, given the 67 cases, negligent homicide charges are being prepared, though those take longer to build. Maya thought about that phrase. Negligent homicide. It was the right category and the right word, and it sat in the room with the weight of 67 names pressing behind it. Sauer? Warfield asked. Cooperation agreement, Torres said. He will serve time. Less than the others, given his cooperation, but he will serve time. He looked at Maya. Knowles has been contacted by federal investigators. He declined to comment without an attorney present, which tells us everything we need to know about what he plans to do next. And Hale? Maya asked. Portland DA's office is reviewing the records tampering and the falsified incident reports for state charges, Torres said. The medical board has suspended his license pending investigation. That came through an hour ago. The suspension is indefinite. He paused. His attorney called at 11:30 to say his client wished to make a statement. The statement was a denial of any wrongdoing and a claim that the records were accessed for legitimate administrative purposes. The 6 recordings say otherwise, Vasquez said. Yes, Torres said. They do. Maya looked at the window. The afternoon sky outside was gray and low, which was Portland being Portland, the weather unchanging and indifferent to whatever was happening underneath it. Somewhere 2 floors up, Reyes was in the ICU with the pressure that had been climbing all morning according to the update Garrett had texted at 10. Somewhere in the hospital, Patricia Holst was recovering in a room with her daughter. Gerald Bauer was at home with whatever version of the last several days he understood, which was probably not the full version, because the full version was larger than any one patient's experience of it. She thought about what Warfield had said, about the closed loop, about how it only broke when someone else saw what you were seeing. The thing that had kept the loop closed for so long was not Hale's intelligence or Sauer's connections or Medcor's legal resources, though all of those had played their parts. The thing that had kept it closed was the basic institutional tendency to protect itself, the preference for a clean record over a true one, for the story that didn't require anyone to be wrong over the story that did. She had not been able to break the loop alone. She'd needed Torres and Garrett and Warfield and Dave and Priya and Abrantes and Okonkwo and even, in the end, Sauer's own calculation that the loop had become more dangerous than exiting it. She'd needed all of those people and a specific sequence of events and the particular accident of Reyes being brought to a hospital where she happened to work. She knew that. She didn't dress it up. But she also knew that the loop had not broken without her, that her presence in it, her refusal to stay out of room 4 even when they'd told her to leave, her decision to sit back down across from Garrett on that plastic chair and say, "Tell me everything," had been the thing that initiated the sequence. Not heroically, not smoothly. She'd been exhausted and angry and running partly on the particular stubbornness that had also gotten her into trouble her entire career. That was the part nobody ever put in the official record, that the thing that looked like recklessness from the outside was frequently just someone refusing to accept that a wrong thing was going to be allowed to stand. At 2 in the afternoon, Farber held a brief staff meeting in the main conference room on the 4th floor. Maya was not required to attend. She went anyway, standing near the back with Priya, and listened to Farber deliver the news that the hospital had cooperated with federal investigators, that Dr. Victor Hale's privileges had been suspended, that an independent review of case files was being initiated, and that any staff member who had information relevant to the investigation could come forward without fear of retaliation. He said it in the careful, legally considered language of a man who had spent the morning with his general counsel, but underneath the language was something that was at least the beginning of accountability. Not full accountability, not the kind that came from having prevented the thing in the first place, but the kind that came from being willing to stand in a room and say it out loud. The staff in the room were quiet in a specific way, not shocked. Most of them had seen enough of Hale's patterns to not be shocked, but reconfiguring. The way people reconfigured when a structure they'd adapted themselves around was suddenly absent and they were working out what the space felt like without it. After the meeting, people moved toward the doors in clusters, talking in low voices, and Maya made her way to the hallway and was almost to the elevator when she heard her name. She turned. A resident she recognized, Schaut, the second year who had been in the hallway during the original confrontation with Hale, who had been very interested in his clipboard, was standing a few feet away. "Collins," he said. He was around 27, earnest in a way that residency hadn't ground down yet. I saw what happened with Bauer. The first day. I was right there." "I remember," she said. "I didn't say anything." He said it directly, not making excuses. "I could have. I saw what Hale did, and I could have said something to someone, and I didn't." She looked at him. "I know why you didn't," she said. "That doesn't make it—" "No," she said. "It doesn't. But knowing why something happens is different from excusing it." She paused. "Now you know what it costs. When the next thing happens, and it will happen somewhere in your career, it always does. You'll know what the price of staying quiet looks like." He nodded. He looked like the information was sitting on him with some weight, which was appropriate. "Say something next time," she said. "That's all." She took the elevator up. Check. Reyes was awake, properly awake, not the heavy, sedation-dragged semi-consciousness of the ICU at its worst, but alert, tracking, with color back in his face that had not been there the night before. He was still attached to monitors and a drain that he clearly found uncomfortable, but he was sitting up slightly, and when Maya walked in, he made the particular effort of a man who wanted to look less wrecked than he was. "Don't," she said. He settled back. Garrett was in the chair beside the bed. He stood when she came in. Okoye says another 48 hours, and he can probably move to a step-down unit, Garrett said. Good, Maya said. She moved to the bedside, checked the monitor out of habit, pressure solid, rate good, the numbers telling the story she wanted to hear. How's the pain? Manageable, Reyes said. On a scale of 1 to 10, and don't lie to me. 6, he said. Maybe 7 in the morning. Tell the nurses when it goes above 5. That's not toughness, that's just information they need to do their job. He looked at her. There was something in his face that was working towards something, some version of the conversation she'd been half expecting since the moment she'd walked into Bay 2 the night before. I heard what happened, he said, last night, after I was in surgery. Some of it, or all of it? Garrett fills me in, he said. So, all of it. She pulled a chair up and sat down. How are you feeling about that? I feel like we brought you a problem and you turned it into something else, he said. You brought yourself a fragment wound, she said. The rest was already here. He was quiet for a moment. Waverly was a good man, he said. I know. He talked about you sometimes, afterward. He said you were the best medic he'd worked with. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the drain. She looked at her own hands on her knees. I didn't save him, she said. The equipment failed. I know that now. She paused. It doesn't change what it felt like for 4 years. Reyes said nothing for a moment. He understood enough to not try to fix that with words, which was one of the things that made him good at what he did. What happens to you now? He asked. I go back to work, she said. Here, for now. There's a review process, a formal reinstatement, a lot of administrative machinery that has to move. She paused. And there will be a trial, probably more than one. I'll testify. And after that? She thought about it honestly, which meant she sat with the uncertainty of it rather than packaging it into something neater than it was. I don't know yet, she said. I've been working in emergency medicine for 2 years, and I'm good at it. That part hasn't changed. She paused. Torres asked me if I'd considered coming back to a consulting role with Naval Medical. Not service. Consulting. Training, protocol development for combat medicine. She looked at Reyes. I haven't decided. What's there to decide? He asked. Whether I trust the institution enough, she said. Given everything. He considered that. The institution isn't the people in it, he said. Sometimes it is, though, she said. That's the problem. Sometimes what the institution does and what the people in it do are the same thing, and you can't fix one without fixing the other. Reyes looked at the ceiling. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might be fading back towards sleep, and then he said, When I was 22 and just into the teams, there was a senior chief who told me something I've thought about ever since. He said the only people who ever fix broken systems are the ones who stay inside them long enough to understand exactly how they're broken. He paused. He was a difficult man. I didn't like him much. He was also right. She didn't say anything. I'm not telling you what to do, he said. I'm telling you that Waverly's not the only name in that folder. There are going to be more unless someone who actually understands what happened gets involved in making sure it doesn't happen again. He looked at her. That's not me being dramatic. That's just math. She stood up. Get some sleep, she said. You too, he said. You look terrible. I know, she said. I'll get to it. She left the room. She slept for 6 hours in a call room that Denise Parrish quietly arranged for her. And when she woke up at 8 in the evening, the world had moved forward without her in the way it did when you finally let yourself stop. She lay on the narrow bed for a few minutes in the dark and took stock. Her badge had been returned at 2 p.m. Denise had brought it personally, had knocked on the call room door and handed it through without ceremony, just set it in Maya's palm and squeezed her hand once and left. Maya had looked at it for a moment before clipping it to her scrub pocket. It was the same badge, same photo, same number, same worn edge on the clip from 2 years of use. It should have felt different, and it didn't, which was somehow right. She hadn't changed, the badge hadn't changed. The only thing that had changed was whether the people around her could see what had been there the whole time. She got up. She washed her face. She went back out. The news broke publicly at 9 that evening. Torres had warned her it was coming. The federal charges against Pruitt and the two MedCorp co-defendants were filed in the late afternoon, and the press release was picked up by 3 national outlets by dinner time. By 9 o'clock, the story had acquired its own gravity and was pulling other elements into it. MedCorp's stock in freefall, congressional statements about procurement oversight, a retired general giving a live interview about the systemic failure of military supply chain accountability. She watched a few minutes of it on the small television in the break room while eating a sandwich that she'd taken from the vending machine selection without particularly caring what was in it. Priya sat across from her. The news anchor was using the phrase decades-long negligence in a way that was not technically accurate, but was directionally correct. "You're not in this," Priya said, watching the screen. "They haven't said your name." "Torres said they'd keep my identity protected during the investigation," Maya said. "Standard witness protocol." "How do you feel about that?" She chewed, swallowed, thought about it. "Fine," she said. "The story isn't about me." "Kind of is, though." "It's about 67 people whose families didn't know what happened to them," Maya said. "I'm a mechanism by which the story got told. That's different from being the story." Priya looked at her for a long moment. "You know, most people would want the credit." "Most people aren't trying to testify in a federal trial," Maya said. "High profiles are inconvenient." Priya snorted. It was the first time Maya had heard her laugh in what felt like a very long time, and it was a better sound than the television. 3 days later, Trish Warfield came back to Harbor Ridge. Not to work. She had a job at a clinic across the city that she'd built in the months since leaving, and she wasn't looking to return. She came to give her formal statement to the independent review panel that Farber had convened as Maya had requested. She came with her folders and her recordings and her attorney, and she sat in the 4th floor conference room for 4 hours and told the panel what she had observed in sequence with documentation. Maya saw her in the hallway afterward. Warfield looked wrung out but steady, the particular steadiness of a person who has said a hard thing in a formal setting and found that they survived it. "How was it?" Maya asked. "Horrible," Warfield said. "I cried twice. Once when I played the recording where he told me I was a problem, once when I listed the dates." She paused. "But I said all of it." "That's enough," Maya said. Warfield looked at her. "Is it? Does saying it change anything?" It was not a rhetorical question. She meant it. Maya thought about how to answer it honestly. "It changes the record," she said. "The official account of what happened in this building for the last 2.5 years now includes your name and your observations. Nobody can erase that." She paused. "Whether it changes behavior in other places, other institutions, I don't know. Maybe some. Probably not enough." She paused again. "But the record matters. The names in the record matter. Waverly's name is going to be in a federal court filing. That's not everything, but it's not nothing." Warfield was quiet. "I keep thinking about the families," she said. "The 67. "So do I," Maya said. "Torres's team is working on notification. It's going to be a long process." She looked at the floor and back up. "There's no good version of that conversation, but there's a true version and there's a false version, and for years the false version was the only one available. Now there's a true one." Warfield nodded slowly. She picked up her bag. "I heard Hale denied everything in his statement," she said. "Yes." "Do you think he actually believes it, his version?" Maya considered. "I think he believes he was managing a necessary situation," she said. "I think he told himself that nurses who questioned him were the problem, not the system that let him answer questions by silencing them. I think that story was very convenient for him, and he told it enough times that it stopped feeling like a choice." She paused. "That's not an excuse, but I think it's probably true." "That's almost scarier than if he just knew he was wrong," Warfield said. "Yes," Maya said. "It is. Chetyat." 6 weeks later, Victor Hale was formally charged by the Oregon District Attorney with 3 counts of falsifying medical records and 2 counts of misconduct in office. The medical board's suspension became a permanent revocation of his license pending the outcome of trial. His attorney released a statement. The statement was the same denial in slightly different words. Dale Pruitt and his co-defendants entered not guilty pleas that their attorneys had clearly spent weeks preparing. The case was expected to go to trial in 14 months. Maya had already submitted her formal witness agreement to Torres's team. William Sauer entered a cooperation agreement. He was placed on administrative leave from his federal position pending the investigation's conclusion. His passport was surrendered. He was not going to Lisbon or anywhere else for a long time. Richard Knowles was indicted in November on charges of conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. He retained Harmon and Litch. His first pretrial hearing was scheduled for January. Botseb. In the weeks between those developments and the ones that followed, Maya worked. She did her 12-hour shifts. She was thorough with her patients and sharp in her assessments, and she followed the protocols that were worth following and pushed back through the correct channels when something needed to be pushed back on. She was not a different person than she'd been before the week that changed everything. She was the same person with a different relationship to the question of whether what she saw and knew and felt was real enough to act on. There were hard days. She would be in the middle of a shift and something would catch in her chest. A date, a supply crate in the hallway with a contractor sticker on it, the particular quality of a patient's face when they were scared and trying not to show it, and she would have to take a breath and find her footing and keep going. That was not a wound fully healed. She didn't know if it ever fully healed, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. What she knew was that she got through those moments. And on the other side of them was the work, which was real and necessary and mattered in the specific concrete way that things mattered when they were the difference between a person going home or not going home. In December, the Harbor Ridge Trauma Training Initiative held its first session. It had taken 2 months to move from Farber's commitment to an actual program. Curriculum development, credentialing, scheduling around the realities of a functioning hospital. And the result was not perfect. The first session had 7 participants and 2 instructors and ran 90 minutes over its scheduled time because one of the case scenarios generated an argument that turned out to be productive, and nobody wanted to cut it short. Maya ran 2 of the modules. She wrote the 3rd from scratch, which took 3 weeks and 3 complete rewrites before it said what she actually meant. The module was about recognizing the difference between protocols that saved lives and protocols that protected institutions. It was not a comfortable module. Participants pushed back on parts of it. She had designed it that way deliberately, because a module that everyone agreed with immediately was probably not challenging anyone to think about anything they hadn't already thought about. After the first session, Denise Parrish found her in the hallway. "The residents are talking about it," Denise said. "Good or bad?" "Both," Denise said, "which means you got it right." Maya clipped her badge to her pocket. "That's the goal." "You know Farber wants to submit the curriculum to 3 other hospital networks," Denise said. "He's already been in contact with a health system in Seattle and 1 in Sacramento." "I know, he told me. How do you feel about that?" She thought about it. The curriculum going to other hospitals meant the framework being applied in rooms she'd never walk into, by people she'd never meet, in situations she couldn't predict. It meant the control of it passing out of her hands, which was something she had complicated feelings about. It also meant that the version of this work that had existed only as her own internal operating system for years, the particular way she thought about patients and decisions and the ethics of institutional medicine, had become something that other people could use. That was not nothing. "I feel okay about it," she said. Denise looked at her for a moment. "I said once that you had good instincts," she said. "I want to amend that." Maya waited. "You have the kind of judgment that most people spend 20 years developing," Denise said. "I don't know where it came from, and I suspect some of it came from places I don't want to think about too hard. But this hospital is better for having you in it." She paused. "I'm sorry it took this long for anyone to say that to you formally." Maya looked at her. The hallway was doing its ordinary thing around them. A cart going past, someone calling a name 2 rooms down, the layered ambient sound of a place that never fully stopped. "Thank you," she said. She meant it simply, without qualification. On a Tuesday in January, in the waiting area outside the ICU that had been the unofficial base of operations for the most consequential night of Maya's recent life, she sat across from Garrett one more time. He was leaving Portland that afternoon. Reyes was fully recovered and had been transferred to an outpatient facility 3 weeks earlier and was expected to return to limited duty by spring, which was better than any timeline Okoye had initially offered. Garrett had a coffee. It was probably cold again. Torres said you turned down the consulting offer, he said. Temporarily, she said. I told him I needed to see the trial process through first. And after. Then I'll decide. She looked at him. Why? Because I put your name forward for something else, he said, and I wanted to tell you before you heard it from someone else. She raised an eyebrow. There's a congressional subcommittee reviewing military medical procurement standards, he said. They're looking for expert witnesses and advisory consultants, people with field experience and institutional medical experience. He looked at her steadily. Your name is on a list. She sat with that. I'm a nurse, she said. Yes, he said. You are. You're also the person who identified a 67-case pattern that a 14-month federal investigation hadn't fully mapped yet, while working a night shift in a hospital after being escorted off the premises. He paused. So, she looked at the window. The January light came through flat and gray and honest, the way January light in Portland always did. No warmth in it, no performance, just the day being what it was. She thought about Waverly. She thought about the folder with 67 names. She thought about what Reyes had said. The only people who ever fix broken systems are the ones who stay inside them long enough to understand exactly how they're broken. She thought about the module she'd written in 3 drafts that still wasn't quite what she wanted it to be, and about the fact that she was already outlining the next one. Tell the subcommittee I'm available by phone, she said, after the trial, and only in an advisory role. I'm not leaving clinical work. Garrett nodded. Something in his face settled. One more thing, she said. Go ahead. Falcon, she said. The call sign. You asked where it came from. He waited. I had a CO on my second deployment, she said. He gave it to me. He said falcons weren't the biggest bird in the sky and they weren't the loudest. He said what made them different was that they could see what other things couldn't see, and they didn't hesitate when they saw it. She paused. I thought it was overly poetic at the time. I was 23. And now? She clipped her badge to her pocket. The same badge, the same worn edge on the clip. Now I think he was doing his best to describe something that's harder to put into words, she said, which is that knowing what to do in a moment doesn't make you brave. It just means you understood the situation clearly enough to move. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. That's a better definition of the thing than most people manage, he said. She stood up. She had a shift starting in 20 minutes. Stay out of trouble, she said. Never works, he said. But I'll try. She walked down the hallway. The hospital moved around her in its layered, relentless way. The carts and the voices and the monitors, the smell of antiseptic and bad coffee, and something unidentifiable that was just the smell of the building itself, which she had inhaled 10,000 times and would probably inhale 10,000 more. She passed the elevator she'd ridden the night Hale had been at the records terminal. She passed the door to the stairwell he'd come through. She passed the trauma bay where she'd stood in the doorway and said the rate is wrong and gotten her arms taken by security guards, and she walked past all of it without stopping because it was behind her and the hallway was in front of her. And there were patients somewhere in this building who were having the worst day of their lives and needed someone who understood the difference between a protocol that saved lives and one that protected institutions. She turned the corner. She put on her gloves. She went to work. This is what nobody tells you about the people who get dismissed, sidelined, pushed out, and overlooked. They don't always come back loudly. Sometimes the return is quiet. A badge clipped back to a pocket, a hallway walked with purpose. A patient looked at directly and told, I'm going to tell you exactly what's happening because you deserve to know. The system does not always apologize. Sometimes it just moves on and hopes you do too. The people who change things are not always the ones who fight loudly in the open. Sometimes they're the ones who stayed precise when everything pushed them toward desperation, who kept documentation when everyone said let it go, who walked back through doors they'd been thrown out of because walking away wasn't something they could do in good conscience. Maya Collins was not perfect. She was stubborn, and she didn't sleep enough, and she was bad at asking for help until the moment she needed it urgently. And there were 4 years of a wrong she'd been carrying that had shaped her in ways she was still mapping. She had not fixed everything. The trial was still coming. The system was still the system. But 67 families now had a true account. A young resident now knew the price of silence. A nurse named Trish Warfield had her documentation in an official record. A training module existed in a hospital in Portland that asked people to think harder about the difference between what they were told to do and what they knew was right. And in a trauma bay somewhere in Harbor Ridge Medical Center, a nurse who had once been walked out the front door was standing at a bedside, doing what she had always done, seeing what others missed, not waiting for permission to act on what she knew. Some things do not require recognition to be real. But when the recognition finally comes, when the record is corrected and the truth is stated and the names are spoken aloud, it matters. Not because it changes the past, because it refuses to let the past be the only version of the story. That is what justice actually looks like most of the time. Not a verdict in a courtroom, not a headline, just a woman walking down a hospital hallway with her badge back on her chest and her eyes open and her hands ready to do the work.